The rich are richer than ever, and the poor are poorer than ever. We're here to shed some light on why it's happening, what can be done, and how you can make the changes needed to start living a more financially free life. Our business has turned over £25 million in the last 5 years. We want others to do the same, and so we're sharing our knowledge and our time instead of keeping it all to ourselves. So stick around to the end of the video and we will be sharing all of our insights as to why this is happening and how you can save yourselves. Right, we'll start with the most frustrating topic for, let's be honest, 90% of the world's population at the minute, which is, why are the rich getting richer?
Well, to be honest, I've been doing a lot of research on this topic for quite a while now. And, there's lots of opposing views. As someone who's getting very, they're getting very renowned at the moment. Gary Stevenson, he's getting a lot of views. And his essential philosophy is that, the rich have got way too much money. They've kind of hoarding it for themselves. We need to tax the rich and redistribute the wealth to the people on lower incomes. Now, me personally, I can't see that's the best way of doing it, really. And the reason is, we've already seen in the UK the biggest number of millionaires leaving the UK, who are all of the job creators. They're the business owners. They're the people that employ everybody within the country. And by ostracizing those people, it diminishes the job market and people lose jobs. But I know you might have a similar or slightly differing opinion. Please share.
Right. I love the rant, but you didn't answer the question. We need to know, to start off with, why are the rich getting richer? Before we get into Gary and his opinion on what we should do with the rich, because we've all got different opinions on how to actually redistribute and how things should get better. But look, why are the rich getting richer?
Love the question. No, the rich are getting richer because the rich own all the assets, be it companies, houses, anything that can be owned that appreciates in value. They hold a lot, or if not most of that wealth. So as those things go up in value, they get richer and richer.
The easiest way to explain it, and I'll be honest, look at the game of Monopoly. And the game of Monopoly was invented by Lizzie Magie in 1903 or the early 1900s. And it was designed based around the landlord's game. And what it was centered around was trying to show that the economic model to give individual freedom and individual choice and make it a fair playing field is better than having a monopolistic economy where a select few own everything. Because if you think about the start of a game of Monopoly, it's complete fair. Everyone starts with the same money, everyone starts in the same position, and everyone starts with the same opportunity to roll the same dice. And that is the game in a nutshell. Now, unfortunately, in life, we don't all start in the same place. We don't all start with the same opportunity, and we don't all start with the same financial backing. Some people have rich parents. Some people come from middle class, lower class, upper class. We all have different ethnicities, different languages. Got there in the end. Different languages and different opportunity, again, as I say. So the actual model of Monopoly, though, if you were to just take it for what it is, everybody starts at the same point. And then as certain players in the game accumulate more properties, accumulate more money from the other players, they are the ones that end up with all of the hotels, all of the properties, and they're the fuckers to land on. And once you land on them, everybody starts hating them. So it is a real life sort of, example of how life works, because the rich then start getting richer. They've got all the houses, they've got all the assets, they've got all the properties that people then land on that you then have to pay. You're then struggling with no cash. You're trying to pass go. You're barely hanging on. mortgaging your own properties just to pay this prick at the top who's got lucky with his dice rolls. And that is kind of that sort of real life extrapolation of people that have now built up all the assets, because all of the people now, let's say, the mass market, they are going to Starbucks for their coffee, spending fortunes. They're going to Nike for their shoes and their sportswear, and they're going to Amazon for all of their online purchases. And they are the assets that the rich have been able to acquire. And now they're just getting richer and richer and richer. So this game of Monopoly is almost continuing. So let's say instead of once you're out in the game of Monopoly, what happens is rather than sort of losing all your money to the player, almost in real life, you're out of the game and then you just go and get a loan and then it gets worse. And then you continue. So the bank bails you out and you get loans and you get credit cards and then you've got interest to pay on that. So you're now paying not only the players that you keep landing on every single day, but you're also now having to pay the interest back to the bank. And so the only way that I can see is the rich getting richer. The only way that I can see that ever changing is if you were to strip the assets away from them. The reality is they're the ones that have built the assets in the first place. So if you were to do that, you'd remove any incentive for these people to actually come across and come up with ideas, come up with Nike, come up with Starbucks, come up with the idea of Amazon, come up with the idea of Tesla. If they just know that it's going to get stolen away from them, there's no incentive for them doing it in the first place. So again, to echo, the rich are getting richer because they own everything. And what we can do about that is got to be a bit of a nuanced argument.
Well, that is where it is. And all these big multinational, huge companies like your Apple, your Amazon, your Netflix, your Spotify, like all these massive, massive corporations, again, Nike, they all started from nothing in reality. So what we don't, and this is where the argument differs, what we don't want to do is stifle the people that go on to then create the Spotifys if they don't see as much of an upside. Now, the argument some people kind of have is, well, I think people would be happy if they don't, if they're a £100 billion company and they only pay $5 billion in taxes and they should be paying 30. And it's like, well, yeah, that is true, but it's a fine line as to which side of the fence you go on.
Well, going back to what you then said at the start, really was talking about Gary Stevenson and his model for, this new utopia of economic stability and fairness is taxing the super rich and taxing them past a wealth of 10 million, which I think is another really valid point to touch on, is that we are taxed so heavily in this country. With anything over sort of, is it 40,000? It starts going up to like 40%. And the crazy thing is that the cost of living has gone up so much and inflation has gone up, but they haven't inflated the tax thresholds to make it equivalent to what was to what now is. And what they should be doing is inflating the tax thresholds for people so that there's an incentive for them to go and work above and beyond what they've currently set at before they start getting shafted and losing half of their earnings, because there needs to be an incentive for people to want to go and earn more money.
Well, the worst thing about that is, and this is where it gets really bad, and I don't know the exact statistics or when it exactly was, but just say for the last minimum 10 years, they've not changed the tax thresholds. And inflation obviously is something that, occurs in the ideal rate of the Bank of England, want 2%. It's been more than that, knowing what happened with COVID. So if it's 45,000 10 years ago and it's 45,000 now, everyone's earning more money, but the cost of living stayed the same. People have been pushed further and further into that higher tax bracket. So they're earning less money, even though they're kind of getting more money. It's getting worse. So that's another reason why it's even more important to increase those brackets, because I think I'm sure about 5 million people since COVID, or approximately 10 to 15% of the population are now paying higher rates of tax because of inflation.
And yeah, the easiest way to think about it is if minimum wage has gone up because of inflation, which devalues the currency. So again, we can all think of it as the easiest way. £15,000 in 1950 is not what £15,000 is of today's money. So that's just the simplest way to think of inflation is the value of the currency is less now than it was. So the tax bands need to be reflective of that, and they're not. Now, with what Gary Stevenson's saying, and I do agree with his argument, because unfortunately the reality is the rich people now, they have that much money and they have that much assets. That internal revenue stream is continuing to compound and grow and get bigger, which means they've got more money, which means they buy more assets, which means there's less assets for other people to buy. And the cost of the other assets go up because there's an abundance of people now with extra cash and all this extra cash. So they had 2 properties, now they've got 4, now they've got 8, now they've got 16. And that's just gradually paying them more and more and more. And to the point that Gary makes that I do truly agree with is that these fuckers need to be stopped, and they do need to have some form of tax placed on them. The issue is the nuance of how to do that, because the world in a modern day is so digitized and it's so free that these people have got the opportunity to operate their businesses from anywhere, operate their lives from anywhere, which means that if you start heavily taxing them on their assets, they're either going to, 1, switch asset, or 2, switch tax residence so they can go to another country like Dubai or Cayman Islands or bloody Portugal people are moving to.
Yeah.
They're moving to these tax havens, and so they don't have to pay the taxes, and all that you're then doing as a country is forcing these people out and forcing them somewhere else. Now, again, Gary, he talks about how in the 50s and the 60s that we were taxing the rich 50, 60, 70%, and it was great. Well, the reality is in that day, it wasn't as digitized as it is today, and that's forcing them to really have no choice but to pay the tax that they've been told to pay, and like it or lump it. Whereas now they'll just up and move.
I mean, yeah, and the way I've just thought to drill it right down where you can put yourselves in the position of a business owner of, worth billions or millions or whatever it might be. If you had a choice of setting up a bank account and there was 2 bank accounts, one of the bank accounts will pay you 4% interest every year. The other bank account will pay you 4%, but of the 4%, 2% goes to the government. And so you only realistically get 2%. Which bank account would you invest your money in?
It's a no-brainer, 4% for yourself.
So if business owners have got the choice of paying themselves or paying less somewhere else, they're going to take it. But they don't just take the business, they take jobs as well. Now, this is where it's extremely difficult. And the only real way that this would ever fully solve itself would be to completely have a worldwide agreed upon tax rate that every single country on planet Earth agreed to for everything. And, that would be about the best way that it would happen. Another massive point would be that breaking down monopolies. So, companies like Microsoft back in the day, they get broken down. They're looking at Google at the moment, so they don't have a monopoly because that is bad for the economy.
A lot of it was the oil companies before that they
exactly.
broke down.
Yeah, Standard Oil. It's all ExxonMobil and Chevron and all these companies. Because if you've got a monopoly, they dictate the prices, and the consumer gets hurt, and that's what then deteriorates people's salaries and their expendable income. So breaking down monopolies is massive, and I think that would be one of the best ways of trying to navigate something like that, as opposed to taxing the companies heavily. You may be potentially better these massive corporates, breaking them up to make them smaller.
Do you know what I heard from someone? It was Rory Sutherland, and he had a really good idea. And I'm sure he might have got it from somebody else. So if it's, it's your idea, then, credit below. But there needs to be some incentives for paying higher rates of tax, because at the minute it's an absolute, it's tax from every which way. VAT, corporation tax, national insurance, and everybody goes, oh, the NHS is free. It's not free. We have to pay NI, both employee and employers. You have to pay PAYE tax. You have to pay tax on your road. You have to pay tax on your car. You have to pay tax on your house. You have to pay tax on everything you buy in value-added tax, VAT. It is an absolute it's mental how we've been able to allow ourselves to get to this point where the government can just dip their hands into our pockets as much as they currently do, without any benefit, and they try and say, oh, we've got you the NHS. Well, that's shit. Oh, well, we look after the roads. Well, they're shit. Oh, well, we look after the streets and keep the streets safe. Do you? The state of the country at the minute. So because the mindset towards the government and the way they're spending the money is it's so dead in the water that people don't want to pay tax. They're actively trying to avoid paying as much as possible. Whereas in countries like Dubai and some of these, let's say Scandinavian countries, where there's a lower rate of crime and roads are, there's no litter and there's no graffiti and the roads are well maintained and it's safe, I don't mind paying tax because it's going to a good cause, and I want people in the healthcare to earn good money and I want the police to earn good money. But there's no incentive for anybody to want to pay tax because the country's in such a shit state. But for example, like for these higher rate earners, rather than squirreling their money away and coming up with clever loopholes, because there always will be clever loopholes to, offset tax. It just will be it's impossible to cover all of them up. You just never will. But if you were to incentivize people to pay more tax, i.e., even if you could just see where your money went, for example, like if they, and I don't know how they do this, but I mean, they should start putting it into play. Like, for example, if I paid, £10,000 in tax, for example, and they sent me a thank you note from the police force in West Midlands saying, thank you for your donation, your tax donation of £2,000. With that, we've been able to pay so-and-so, or we've been able to bring in 2 new members of the police force to keep your streets safe. I'd be like, oh, buzz it, not thanks very much. Like charities, how they do it, where you make a charitable donation to a donkey sanctuary or something, and it's like, you've helped Eeyore get a new life or a new hoof.
Carrot.
Great. And it makes you feel a bit more connected to what you're doing. Some other clever incentives, which Rory Sutherland talked about, was things like, you get to drive in the bus lanes or something, or you get preferential parking, or you get, the whole thing. I had the idea with like the NHS. I know there's private healthcare, but it might be that you get, seen quicker on certain operations or benefits in that sense. So it encourages people to pay more than they currently are, rather than feeling so sick to the stomach about paying any tax because it just goes to waste. Again, we've all seen what's going on with the Doge in the USA and the waste that they're uncovering. People would be a lot happier to pay more.
The other big one on the same point is a lot of these billionaires, they love the thought of kind of immortality, I suppose, and the recognition of the things that sometimes they've done. Now, there's a lot of billionaires out there that, when they die, their money goes to, certain things. Now, to reinforce that, they sometimes get named, schools, or I know Carnegie, you got like Carnegie Hall, and I can't think of any more examples, but there's loads. There's the Rockefeller Center after like John D. Rockefeller. And these people have brought in such immense wealth to the country. I mean, I don't know if they built these buildings themselves, but, these things get named after them. It's the legacy part of it. And it's massively important. And I think that would also really incentivize billionaires, probably more in the UK, to actually put the money in, rather than, I suppose, when we've seen people of the past, their statues get torn down and get thrown into a river. So that's probably not the way of doing it.
Yeah, and that has happened, and it will always happen. But again, the one thing I do agree with Gary on is that this tax the super rich, because what's happening at the minute is the super rich have got no incentive to pay larger sums of tax. But what they're then having to be forced to do, because they can't tax them because they're in the Cayman Islands, or they're tied up in businesses, or they're tied up in assets that they can't currently tax, where the government are then getting their money from is the middle class and smaller companies. That's then straining the economy even more because the small to medium businesses are the ones that's paying the most tax and keeping the economy cropped up. But when they roll out things like they've just done on the most recent budget, the increased employers' national insurance, I don't know why they don't have the wherewithal to think, right, well, that's causing businesses, these small businesses, to pay more in NI. Now we've got certain employees that might be due or might want a pay rise or deserve a pay rise, but they've just had it. They've just had it through the increase in the employer's NI that the government is now taking directly from them, with the cost of living also going up and inflation happening. So companies are now struggling to pay their staff and give them the increases that they deserve because they've just had to give it to the government. And the only real solution to that is companies have to increase their profits to help pay for that increase. And the only way they can do that is either reduce the amount that they pay for their goods or increase the amount that they sell them for. And so realistically, that leads to cost increases. Now, cost increases for businesses, which means that if, example, I used to sell that jug there for £1 and these 2 glasses for 50p, well, I've now got to pay my staff more and I've got to pay the government more. So what am I going to do? Right? Well, I'm now selling them for £1.50 or £2 and £1 each. So it's gone from being a £2 collective buy to £4. Inflation. So now you go into the shop and you go to buy your glass jug that you used to pay £2 for. You're now paying £4 for it because businesses have had to put their prices up to pay for the increases that the government have created through the increase in tax. So they're then getting shafted again because consumers are now paying more for their goods and because of inflation, their salaries are worth less. So they're getting shafted from both ends.
Yeah.
And the government just has no idea because they're not business people that this is happening. They just think, tax, tax, tax.
Yeah. And they have to put these taxes in place in reality because they've overspent and the government doesn't generate any money. It just takes in money. So what they have to do at that point is just tax more people. So that increases people's cost of living. And it's just not a sustainable way. I mean, businesses in reality, Milton Friedman says it, don't really pay tax. It's the business, it's the people behind it's the business owners or it's the shareholders or the employees, because a business has to make a certain level of profit each year. They have to. And that figure is pretty much fixed over a long period of time. You'll have peaks and troughs, but it has to be at a certain level. So if their costs of, like you're saying, if their cost of goods goes up, they just have to put the price of the product up as well. So the people that pay it again are, the people who are buying that good and service. So it's just not sustainable. And it's just a shame.
I just wish that the country as a whole had a better understanding of economics. And really all this circles back to is, what you should be doing as an individual to help yourself in this economic climate, because the reality is it's going to get worse. It is not going to get better. The rich are going to continue to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer until something happens. And the reality is my solution, and it's one of, it's quite an entrepreneurial solution, but the reality is your future is in your hands. And the way I see life, and my life in particular, is that I am in control. And if I spend my entire time complaining about the government, complaining about my situation, and being that person on the Monopoly board that rather than rolling the dice and saying, look, I can use the hand that I've been dealt. Instead, I'm just going to not roll and kick up a stink and go, I'm not playing. Well, the reality is you've got to play and you've got to do the best with what you've got. So take some ownership, take some accountability, and start thinking about how you can take yourself out or into a better situation you're currently in, whether that's through starting a business, starting a side hustle, learning more about the current role that you're in and developing your role within the business that you're currently in. If you're earning 35 grand a year, well, the quickest way to get to 40 or the quickest way to get to 45, 50 is by increasing the value that you offer that business rather than just waiting for inflation to take place and have the company owner give you a 3% pay rise each year to account for inflation. Now, yes, every business should be doing that. But the reality is, if you only want your money to stay in line with inflation, you're only ever going to be earning minimum wage plus a bit. You want, or you should want, to help yourself get out of this economic disaster that we're in. You need to push for more. And the only way to do that is to increase your value to people around you. And the best way to do that is through learning, joining the right companies. We've just done a great video on how to land the perfect job. So give that a watch. We've got plenty of other videos on here about increasing salary and increasing your value. So it's all about learning. And again, you can piss and moan, you can complain, tax the rich, you can hate the rich. But the reality is you'll say all of that and then you'll still go shopping at Nike. You'll still go online on Amazon. You'll still go and get your coffee from Starbucks. You'll still shop in all these big stores that are owned by these multi-billionaires, and you're not going to change. So you need to take sovereignty of your own life and do something about it.
Yeah. And with the money, at the end of the day, get into, if you're not the type of person who's going to be able to create your own business, learn about investing, because, there's a funny story again that Milton Friedman says, and he essentially says that there's a guy, he goes up to his doctor, or goes up to a scientist, I suppose would make more sense. He says, hi, Mr. Scientist, I want to be a multi-millionaire. I want nothing more than just to be a millionaire. I want to be able to afford all these things and get all the, buy these cars, X, Y, and Z. And he said, right, well, I've got this cryogenic chamber here that can freeze you for 100 years. How much money have you got? And he's gone, I've got like about 10 grand. So he said, put it in your bank. I can freeze you. And then 100 years, you'll wake up and you'll be a millionaire. You'll see, with all the interest that you'll earn. He's going, right, okay. So he's got down 100 years later. It's all worked perfectly. He's woke up. Shows you how old the story is now, by the way. That he then goes out into the street, goes to the nearby payphone, calls up his local banker and says, "Oh, Mr. Banker, like, how much money have I got?" He goes, "Good to hear. You'll be happy to know. You got about 10 million." He's like, "Bloody hell, like 10! Oh, fantastic!" And then the phone cuts off. He said, "You're going to need an extra £1 million to continue the phone call." And it's like, well, there you go. It's inflation that is one of the biggest taxes that we've all got to pay. And we kind of all want it in a way that we want our government to spend more money, but the government can't bring that in taxes. And it's just a vicious cycle, but it's a funny analogy.
No, it's a great representation of what is real life. And the reality is you can fight inflation all you want, or you can fight gradual pay increases. But the quickest way to get yourself to become financially free is quite literally to, and I hate to say it, join the rich in what they're doing. Find an asset that you can add value to, or build a business that you then can turn into an asset and use that. And then you can, like you said, if you can't beat them, join them. The reality is you're not going to beat them, because it's impossible. Because unless there's a complete factory reset where the kid who's losing the game of Monopoly flips the board and says, "I'm not playing," and everybody loses all their stuff and starts from zero again. But even if you did that, the same thing would happen again. Over time, standard thing in society is there are always going to be people that have more. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we lived in, this lovely la la land, fairyland utopia where everybody has the same, or everybody gets, nobody needs money, nobody needs anything. It's all paid for and done by some lovely, giver from above. But the reality is that ain't happening. So take some sovereignty for your own life, for the people around you. And like you said, you've got to escape this economic disaster that we're in. And you've got to do it by building a business. You've got to do it by increasing your value and looking for what assets are still available and helping yourself get there.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not all doom and gloom, people. For us, we're doing our very best to help as many people as we can by giving them the knowledge and the information that they need to help break away from their current financial situation. If you want We are here to help. We can help you build a business, start a business, scale a business, or improve your current economic situation. And we're doing it for free. Reach out to us on any of our social media platforms at Brothers in Business or Brothers in Business Pod. I'm sure you'll find us. Send us a message and we will help you directly to start on that path of success and financial freedom. Remember, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment if you've got any questions or with any video ideas that you want to see us cover in the future. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and remember, reach out to us on social media because we'd love to help you.